Afternoon, and I thank Dr. Sunil and the team to give me this opportunity to share my views in this session on game changer. And by definition, game changer is something which really changes the practices that you have or the thought process that you have for a given thing. That is the definition, dictionary definition of game changing. And how the thought of late effects and aftercare has changed our practices in pediatric oncology, and how we should be caring for these survivors from future perspective I'll try to illustrate in this presentation. We all know that with judicious use of surgery, chemotherapy and radiation therapy, the childhood cancer is a success story, and we can look and be very proud. It's really a good page in the whole entire field of oncology that you have almost 80% across the board 5-year survival. And this is from a very large prospectively followed up SEER data. As you can see that you have some cancers with almost more than 90% survival vis-a-vis some others who are less than 70%. But overall, you can say 80% of the childhood cancer can be cured, or they will be the survivors. So the magnitude of problem is quite significant, because with 11,000, almost 11,000 new childhood cancers in USA, they already have 380,000 survivors in their population, which by year 2020 will increase and exceed 500,000. And thus it will form one of 530 young adults between 20 and 39 years who are childhood cancer survivors. So they are very much part of the whole society. No such estimates are possible in India, but we see around 40 to 50,000 children, and with this growing community of a well-trained pediatric oncologist in this country now, over a period of last 3 decades, though I started off with only 10 to 20% survival some time ago, now we can prospectively increase it to 40 to 50% and beyond. And the number of survivors which we will add is going to potentially or very rapidly going to increase, and we be better aware of it and how we can get ready for this phenomena. As the cure rate improves, the quality of survival becomes more significant. It's not complete cure, but complete cure is not just the freedom from cancer, but it is always weighing the risk of treatment modality in hampering quality of survival and contribution of treatment modality towards cure. So you have to always balance the cure and the cost of therapy. Cure at any cost can never be now considered, particularly in pediatric age group. As we saw, the survival it's all not very good what ends good, at least in pediatric or childhood cancer survivors, because when you prospectively follow them up for 10, 20 and 30 years, the distribution that you see, that there is a lot of attrition due to many other things. Like 22% are live and without any problem. But when you look at the 34% die within 30 years, like this is a 30-year follow-up, and 20% of them die in first 5 years and 14%. So there is a large 1/3 of the population with a premature mortality. And this is mainly due to, in a childhood cancer survivor study in USA, they have shown, it is mainly due to very late recurrence of the disease, which is unanticipated beyond 5 years, and second malignant neoplasm, which they are prone to. And 25% survive at least 30 years but suffer mild or moderate conditions which are treatable, but they have to be under surveillance. And 19% survive at least 30 years and beyond, but they have a life-threatening or disabling chronic health conditions which will restrain their overall or will bring down their potential for life living. So we cannot have this kind of an attitude which Karen in 1973 documented, that if someone lived long enough to develop long-term complications, we would jump for joy and treat the complications. This is no more true, because we know that we are capable of curing children, but this cure cannot come at the cost of many other things, and we have to be aware upfront about these possibilities and take care of them. Dr. Lashkar very beautifully went through various phases in treatment of various diseases, that how this consideration has led to the evolution of better refinement in technique. Now this has been, and for practical purposes we have to define a survivor. So the definition of survivor is that at least 2 years after cessation of therapy or 5 years from diagnosis, whichever is later, is considered as a landmark milestone when you say that this child is a childhood cancer survivor. And there are two basic definitions which we have to understand. Long-term effects, they refer to any side effects or complications of treatment for which a cancer patient must compensate, also known as a persistent effects. They begin during treatment and continue beyond the end of treatment. For example, if you have a severe Vincristine neuropathy which persists beyond the completion of treatment, it becomes a long-term or a persistent late effect or persistent effect. While the late effects, they refer to unrecognized toxicity that are absent or subclinical at the end of therapy and become manifest later with the unmasking of unseen injury because of any of the following factors, which are developmental processes, failure of compensatory mechanisms with the passage of time, and organ senescence. So these are unpredictable. We know that it may cause, but not necessarily it will. So these are, so there is a difference between acute toxicity of chemotherapy or any of the cancer therapy and the late effects. Acute toxicities are well documented, can usually be anticipated depending on the drugs that you are using, and often offset by periods of good health between the 2 cycles and at the end of therapy. While late effects are recently identified, the information is incomplete and evolving. Many could not have been anticipated and can compromise health over entire lifespan when it sets in. And this late effects is an interplay of 3 main things: host factor, tumor factors, and treatment factors. Now, tumor factors depends on the type of tumor, whether it is a high grade, and what is the biology of the tumor. Host factors are genetics, premorbid conditions, age, gender, and health behaviors, which is very, very important. The risky health behaviors contribute more towards the late effects. And the treatment factors, the 3 modalities to which we now add with immunotherapy and many other things which will get added. But the 3 basic modalities, how judiciously and intelligently we use, that is surgery, chemotherapy, and radiotherapy. So the late effects of these therapies can be anywhere from head to toe, like from brain, endocrine, pulmonary, cardiovascular, liver and GI system, kidneys, musculoskeletal, and most dreaded of all is second malignant neoplasm. So consequences of cancer survival is in the form of physical, anatomic or functional changes that you may see, organ toxicities or morbidities that lead to premature onset of chronic illnesses. Like for example, you have irradiated the coronary artery disease, which is supposed to set in 4th and 5th decade, can get earlier, and so on. And socio-economic burdens, psychological disturbances. Once a cancer patient remains always a cancer patient. Any cancer experience is one of the biggest drawback, and socio-economic burden. There is an increased risk of second malignancy, which contribute further. Irradiated area can lead to the poor wound healing that one has to. So the sub based on the model of St. Jude Children's Hospital of USA, and the whole idea here is to monitor growth, development, sexual maturation of survivors, to monitor late effects of therapy, to address psychosocial problems and rehabilitation for useful, productive this thing. Sorry. And this is again a multidisciplinary team where a pediatric oncologist along with clinical psychologist and social worker and array of medical super specialists, they have to work together. And basically, after doing all this assessment, what is most important thing is to give a document or a survivor care plan about which everybody is talking, where you write a medical summary of treatment and recommended plan for follow-up based on their prior exposure. And this provides internal and external physician as well as the patient with the information. So the whole care has to be patient-centric, and you have to involve the growing childhood cancer survivor about the cancer treatment the patient received, the late effects which are anticipated, preventive care recommendations, psychosocial concern, and recommended follow-up. So this I will not go. We had now it is more than 3,000 children. Dr. Maya is looking after that clinic after my departure from Tata Hospital. And what I want to stress is that even in a controlled environment, the follow-up goes down. Like those who are recently enrolled between 2006 and 2011, then 85% were following up. And as you prospectively look at them in the ACT clinic, it fell to 1/3. So you have the increasing incidence of life-threatening late effects on longitudinal follow-up, but significant increasing trend of stopping the follow-up over a period of time. So even in a controlled environment, you cannot control their follow-up because they have to move on. They have a lot of agenda in their life. They are studying, they go for anywhere depending on entrance exams, wherever they get admission, they go. So it is a very mobile population. So we have formed this childhood cancer survivor support group called OGAM for self-empowerment. You make them responsible for their life, and they have to feel responsible for themselves, and also create a social awareness and allow them to reborn. Thus the ACT clinic or the follow-up clinic cannot be only looking at the medical follow-up. It has to have the integrated approach with various components like this, including the childhood cancer survivors support group and empowerment of those survivors to take this moment forward. So in conclusion, I will say that majority of children and young adults diagnosed with cancer will become long-term survivors. Cancer and its treatment predispose to excess morbidity that increases risk of early mortality. Late effect research provides data to anticipate treatment-related health risk. Health screening surveillance provides opportunity for prevention, early detection and interventions that may preserve health wellness. And survivors and providers need guidance to be proactive about cancer-related health risk. We cannot deny that. We don't have to make them very fearful about it, but they have to be aware of it. So these are the young survivors who have grown and now formed this survivor support group, and they are young adults, and they are taking their matter forward. So let us together make possible new and brighter beginning for cancer survivors by empowering them and making them responsible for what they are supposed to do. Thank you.
I think I'll address this question to Dr. Kurkure. In the pediatric surgical setup with children with congenital anomalies as well as those after pediatric transplantation, this whole phenomenon of transitioning them to adult care becomes a big issue. So what has been the experience with you all? I mean, though Tata is a place where you also have adult services, but what has been the experience of how interested the adult population, adult physicians are to start looking after these children in a more comprehensive manner?
No, that is a very interesting question, and it has perplexed the whole world. How to transition them from the care of from the pediatric setup to the adult setup. And the classical example is the UK. Like they are very much pro-adolescent and young adult, that AYA care people. And what they are now doing is they are establishing transition care clinics in which literally the survivor comes, and to begin with, the pediatric oncologist and the adult oncologist, they, like whoever they have identified, they sit together and literally they hand over, and then the pediatric oncologist takes a back seat and the adult person takes over. Because by writing and referring them, even in Tata, where everything was available, it doesn't work. Let me tell you that. It doesn't work. Even for second malignant neoplasm, if I have to refer somebody for thyroid cancer to my head and neck team, I have to literally hold the hand and go to head and neck unit and say that please operate. This is it. So it doesn't happen because their file still says master so and so. So he is lost between me and them. I have to go and hand it over to them, hand that person to the care provider. So that such transition clinics are now happening, but it is a big problem. In a place like Tata, it is possible because you just go across and speak to your colleague and it will be taken care of. But the problem at Tata is different. Like if I have a renal toxicity, I have no one. If I have a neurological toxicity, I don't have a neurologist available, and so on and so forth. So a cardiac problem. So each place has its problem. So it is a problem. But everybody, if he's aware of it, then you can handing over becomes easier, like even your adult physicians.
Thank you very much for your... It's working. Yeah. Thank you all for your excellent talk. So I'm a pediatric oncologist from UK, and I just wanted to add on to what you've already said, Dr. Kurkre, about the long-term follow-up. And in fact, I'll be talking tomorrow, so I can quite highlight how our transition process is taking place, if that'll help. So thank you very much. And my question was to Dr. Mukta. So it's basically comment and question. So you talked about neuroblastoma and how we are thinking about segmental chromosomal abnormalities and also how the risk pattern changes when you have these segmental chromosomal abnormalities. For my own information, so what are we doing in India here about segmental chromosomal abnormalities was my one question. And then following that, I can tell you what we are doing in the UK plus COG, which is together is changing the way we treat these children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just like as I mentioned in my talk, like as of now, we are making use of that information in infantile neuroblastomas who are low risk in terms of histology and MYC non-amplified and who lack 11q aberration. So it is like going beyond the INRG. Mm. So in infants, we do make use of these parameters which are beyond INRG. But when it's coming to the non-infantile age group, we haven't really modified our program treatment protocol right now, but I would be very interested to know if you have, because that seems to be the way forward looking at overwhelming evidence that we have right now, especially, you know, the number of segmental chromosomal abnormalities. And we are finding at least, what should I say, more than 40% of the neuroblastomas have more than at least 4 SCAs.
Yeah, so in the Europe, we have an open study which is called the LINES, Low and Intermediate Risk Group European Study. And in the UK, we obviously are doing a version of that. And then in the US, obviously, it's the COG. So what we have identified from the low and intermediate risk study is we give them various categories. So in that particular, we have a subgroup 8, which is characterized by age being over 18 months. Having unfavorable histology, meaning poorly differentiated or undifferentiated neuroblastoma, with the presence of segmental chromosomal abnormalities. So if we have these 3 criteria, we've had both the European group and our UK group, we call them as group 8, do not do well. So the outcome of these children, both the overall survival, event-free survival, is much less, in the order of just 60% or even 50 to 60%. So what we have done now within the UK is we've called this as the group 8 patients. So there's an earlier on discussion about these patients with us as the panelists as to whether we modify treatment. And there are instances where we are suggesting such patients should be treated as high risk. And similarly, in the US, the COG now has pulled out these group 8 patients, and they are being treated as high risk actually because their outcome is so poor compared to the rest.
That makes so much of sense. It does make a lot of sense, yeah.
So which is why MLPA has become so important for us, and SNP obviously has overtaken it, especially for the low and intermediate risk. And which is why we say even in the infants, we do need a biopsy, we do need biology.
Yeah. So you are increasing the risk to high risk.
In that small subgroup, which in our audit was about 20% of the entire low and intermediate risk, which is a reasonable number.
Sure. And what about the infantile?
So the
it
infant
includes the infantile?
Yeah, so age, particularly if they're over 18 months of age. Whereas if they are less than 18 months of age, we still would consider to see the response. And if the response is not very good after, say, 4 cycles of carboplatin etoposide, we would have a rediscussion.
Right. But if you're treating an infantile neuroblastoma with chemotherapy, so to begin with, it wasn't a low risk.
Correct.
Am I right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what we are doing in our clinics is the otherwise low risk infantile neuroblastomas, we are upgrading them to intermediate risk based solely upon the SCAs.
Yeah, that's right. So that also happens. Plus, in addition, within those who are over 18 months, the intermediate risk get transferred to high risk as well.
Right.
In that
makes
small
much
population.
sense. And I think we have to move in that direction sooner or later. Sooner the better.
Thank you.
Now that you are doing ALK-P, P1, COG has been looking at adding crizotinib in the induction along with chemotherapy to increase the response rate.
That's right, yeah, that's right. And I must say, I mean, I'm not here to promote MLPA, but what we have found is MLPA, the cost of MLPA is exactly the same as we used to charge patients for NMIC fish. And in that same amount of money, we are testing so many other chromosomes which are clinically relevant in a single one given assay. And NMIC is a part of it, and apart from NMIC, we are also testing, the other ones, including ALK.
Hi, my name is Dr. Mohan. I'm a pediatric surgeon from Davangere. So I'm a pediatric surgeon from Davangere. My name is Dr. Mohan. So one of the couple of things that you brought out in your talks today is one about the survivals and the real bad morbidities, which is almost 50%. One thing, I know in a lot of the West and recently in New Zealand and the Fiji Islands where they manage those places, they actually limit the amount of treatment for those patients which they can stratify into that group, because the cost of $300, $400, $500,000, $1 million to treat these patients is just not worth it. The money can be put anywhere. So do we have any guidelines for those from our Indian setup? Because the problem for us is, the ones they'll survive for 5 years and we think, yes, excellent, great. And then you've just showed us that 50% of them do very, very, very badly. And the second part is, because I'm a pediatric surgeon, I have a lot of pediatricians where I work who don't have a lot of oncology support. So we are actually happy to provide support for all your patients you talk about from a major oncology center for the follow-up. But do you have any guidelines which could assist us, or would the team, I know Dr. Sunil's here, could help us get those guidelines to help us in the peripheries where we can actually treat a lot of patients, do the follow-up for you, and make sure they come in and follow up regularly. Because you're saying 15% in Tata, your follow-up is dropped to 1/3 within a few years, which is, then the point is, why are you treating these patients in the first place if they're so bad? So I know it's a bit confusing, but we're sitting in the periphery looking at patients who need the support, and we don't even have the update or the knowledge. I'm not just talking of pediatric surgeons, I'm talking about the pediatricians as well, who cannot keep up to date. It's not possible. And then once they go to you or whoever the treatment person is, it's very difficult for us to link that follow-up. And this is something that needs to be done at a state and national level, independent of private or government. So just a bit about that, if you could mind. Thank you.
No, you are absolutely right. We need to develop our Indian scenario-oriented guidelines for follow-up and how to take care of the survivors, because if you look at the COG guidelines, they are very complicated in the sense they are exposure-based. While if you are going to depend on the pediatricians, they will not have the slightest clue about how this exposure-based to go for a given patient. So it should be more of a disease-based guidelines, which you can, and then era-wise also there is a difference, because those who were treated before, those who are treated in this era, because the treatment protocols have evolved. The like for example, classical example is ALL. Previously we always used to have the cranial irradiation, and now we are not using cranial irradiation. So it's going to make a difference for a given survivor. So we need to, era-wise plus disease-wise, we have to put the things together. And then pediatricians can participate, or even adult physician can participate when they become adult.
The duration of how much time do we get the report? Is the same as a fish?
7
But-
days, madam.
So-
7 days.
So for
from-
our postal and everything, about 2 weeks, same as.
Yes.